Okay, well, we should get started. Makes it nice and easy for me. All the important details are right on the screen there. Visiting with us today is Erin Fehr, who's with the Seqouyah National Research Center, which is affiliated with UALR. And she's going to talk to us today about what the Research Center does, answer any questions we have, and I think talk a little bit about how people can get involved with their work.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Well, thank you for having me. I thought I'd introduce who I am, and then we're going to talk about what we do at the Sequoyah National Research Center, and then we're going to have plenty of time at the end to answer any of your burning questions that you may have. My name is Erin Fehr. I was born and raised in Arkansas, but I am Yupik, which is Alaska Native. My grandmother was born on the far western coast of Alaska in Hooper Bay, and then as an adult, she moved to Anchorage, where she met and married my grandfather, who was from Watson, Arkansas. And my dad was born in Anchorage, and then he and his sister and dad moved back to Arkansas. So I'm one of the few Yupik people you'll meet that has a Southern accent. I have been at the Sequoyah National Research Center since 2011. I actually started out as an intern right after grad school in 2010 because I'm like, oh no, I've got to get a job, which y'all get there. But I love what I do. And I, to be honest, had no idea that this even existed until I worked there. And so I enjoy telling people what we do and invite anybody to come and see us whenever you have a chance. So to begin, let's see. I thought I would tell you about, okay, there we go. How we started. So we actually began in 1983, the year I was born. So I think there was like a meant to be kind of thing in there, by two English professors at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, Dr. Daniel Littlefield, who is our still current director and my boss, and Dr. James Perrins. They were both tenured in the English department, and they were doing research on Native American authors. And so they were traveling the country to look at these collections. And what they found is that a lot of Native writing was showing up in newspapers. But when they would go and visit these collections, libraries and archives were treating Native published newspapers as alternative literature. And so they weren't treated the same as like New York Times or Washington Post or any of those big papers. And they were like stuffed in closets and basements and filing cabinets, and they just had to go and dig. Well, one particular research trip they took to the University of Arizona, the librarian told them that they were getting rid of this collection of Native newspapers. And like, they just couldn't believe this. We can't let this go because this was contemporary newspapers that were just being tossed. And so they said, well, if you're getting rid of it, can we keep it? And so she said, sure, they're on the loading dock in the back. And so they loaded Dr. Littlefield's pickup truck with a camper top and drove it back to Arkansas. And on the way back, they're like, we can't just keep this to ourselves. This is too good of a collection. And so they decided then to create what they called a clearinghouse. Another big collection that came to us in the very beginning was from UCLA. And I bet they're kicking themselves now that they know what we've got. When we first began, we were really focused on just Native published newspapers and periodicals, because they asked themselves, what are people 50 years from now going to know about Native people from today in the 70s and 80s? And so that was really their focus and their primary vision. So they established the archive at UALR, but we did not get our first budget until fiscal year 2006. And so up until that time, they were operating strictly on volunteerism and private donations and grants when they could get them. We are now the largest, I'm going to figure this out by the end of it. We are now the largest collection of Native American newspapers and periodicals in the world. We have 2,800 titles within our collection, and they range from a single issue to the entire issue or run of the Navajo Times. They began in 1959, and we have every issue that's ever been published until this week. So I thought I would highlight some of the key interesting points in our collection. So the first Native newspaper was actually published in February of 1828 by the Cherokee Nation when they were still in New Echota, Georgia, before the Indian removal and Trail of Tears. What was really unique about that newspaper is that it was printed bilingually. And so they had English language articles in there as well as Cherokee articles. And we actually got our name from Sequoyah, who created the written syllabary to the Cherokee language. When the Cherokee Phoenix was published, they really began it as a way to assert their tribal sovereignty and to fight back against this idea of removal. And so it was widely distributed, and it was sent overseas to England and other places. And so today, the largest collection of the Cherokee Phoenix hard copy is at the British Museum. But we do have it all on microfilm if you do want to come take a look at it. The oldest newspaper in our collection is the Choctaw Telegraph that was printed in 1849, and we only have one issue of that. But I always like to, whenever we have students come, show them this 1849 issue and a 1989 issue and compare how much better quality the 1849 issue is because of the high cotton content. We are very much a contemporary archive, so most of our collection is post-World War II, because that's really when Native publishing just exploded, and it all had to do with tribal sovereignty, the American Indian movement, and the Trail of Broken Treaties, all of those kinds of issues that were happening. Oh, I keep pushing the wrong button. I'm sorry, y'all. Okay, so some of the topics that you can explore through newspapers, because I think a lot of people don't think of newspapers as a resource, and it is very much a rich resource. And so I've just pulled out 3 topics. The first one that you can use newspapers for is culture. A lot of these Native publications have cultural content in them, whether it's traditional stories, or even I used this comic strip that was created in an Alaska Native newspaper, and they'll use that to kind of tell their own history. Another thing is activism and Native rights, like I was talking about with the American Indian movement. This little clip is actually from Akwesasne Notes, which was one of the most important newspapers during the late 60s and early 70s. And I don't know if you've heard about the Leonard Peltier and his sentence being commuted, but a lot of that was happening at this same time. And then lastly, free press is a definite issue that can be explored through our newspapers. Many people don't realize, they assume because we're in the United States, Native newspapers operate using free press as well, but they do not. There are only 5 publications that are tribally owned and run that have free press written in their constitution. An interesting tidbit: the Muskogee Creek Nation just gained their free press initiative in 2020, and the Native American Journalists Association, which is now the Indigenous Journalists Association, they created a documentary to follow that free press issue with the Muskogee Creek, and the documentary is called Bad Press. We were able to contribute a lot of archival documents to that. So it was a really cool project to be a part of. And if you would like to see it, it is available on the Criterion channel. I don't know how you get to it, but there you go. But they won a special, this documentary won a special award at Sundance where it premiered. So it's very well done. I would recommend it for sure. And then before I switch gears, we partnered with AM Digital, which is, they are located in England, and they do a lot of great digital resources. And we created Indigenous Newspapers in North America, which is a searchable database. Within that collection, we were able to contribute 43 of our publications that they came and spent, I think, 4 months with us digitizing over 150,000 pages to upload to this. And it was published in 2016, and it is still available. If your excuse me, if your university does not have this access to this, and you're interested, they are very generous with free trials. So I would suggest looking into that, or you can come and visit us and you can use it for free. So, excuse me, let me get a drink. When we first began, it was really just newspapers. But we realized that there were other things out there that we needed to collect. So I thought I would highlight a couple of manuscript collections that I think are really interesting that are underutilized within our collection. So the first one is the Garrard Ardenium collection, which was created by Elise Locke Garrard. She was a Seminole and Choctaw woman who was the granddaughter of the first female chief of the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma. And she attended University of Oklahoma, my alma mater. And she was a drama teacher who taught in Oklahoma City public schools. And then when World War II came around, she decided she needed to do something. And so she became an Army hostess, first at Camp Gruber, which was in Oklahoma. And then after the war was over, they shipped her to Germany, where she created an officers club in Berlin and Munich. And we have an incredible photograph collection that she took while she was in Germany, and it's just the coolest to look at. And she was very highly regarded by the generals that she worked with, and got some awards and nominations for things. And so once the war was over, she came back to Oklahoma, and she met and married an oil executive. And then she didn't have to work, so she became a philanthropist. And so she was very much a progressive for her time period. And she decided to create the Ardenium in McAlester, Oklahoma. And she made up this word. She combined the word garden and museum and just put them together to create this Ardenium. And she wanted to really preserve life in McAlester, Oklahoma. And so she would have her friends give her things that she could keep and put in this archive. It's just a really interesting tidbit. And so in addition to her life being explored within this collection, we also have her friends and family in there as well. Her husband, because she was a drama teacher, she and her husband created the Best Play Prize at the Five Civilized Tribes Museum there in McAlester, because she wanted to foster a Native American play genre. And so that's how she thought, well, let's ask people to write them and we'll reward them for that. And so in 1974, they created this, and it was supposed to run in perpetuity, but we all know how those things happen. It fizzled out in the early 2000s. And So in our collection, we have a huge collection of all of these plays that were written as part of this Best Play Prize. So if you're interested in Native authored plays, come see us. Next collection is Robert J. Conley's collection. He was a member of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, and he wrote over 80 books within his lifetime. Most of them were historical fiction and most were Westerns. But what he did was he situated real life Native American heroes into these books and brought them to life. For instance, Ned Christie is considered an outlaw, but he is looked at as a hero within the Cherokee Nation, and so he wrote several books about Ned Christie. Robert Conley was the first and only Native American president of the Western Writers of America Association, and then in 2014, I don't know, like 2 months before he passed away, they awarded him with the Lifetime Achievement Award. So within our collection of the Conley papers are manuscript after manuscript where he was writing these books. His widow also donated his entire personal library to us, which is an interesting find because you're thinking he's writing westerns and he's Cherokee, but he was classically trained, and so there's tons of Shakespeare and Lord Byron and Balzac, and so it's a really interesting mix. And another tidbit that you wouldn't think of, a Cherokee Western author, he actually started out as a professional ballet dancer and got written up in Variety magazine. So he was a really interesting character for sure. And then we also have the Fraser collection. And this is a huge collection that was donated to us covering 200 years of one Cherokee family's history, from when they were in Tennessee until they relocated to what is now Oklahoma. In addition to the Morgan family, there are also 3 different allied families that are here within this collection. On the top of the screen, you'll see a typewritten letter with an illustration, and the illustration was drawn by Roger Eubanks, who was a Cherokee cartoonist and illustrator. He was from Oklahoma, but he actually moved to, oh, it has escaped me. A tiny little town in North Arkansas, and he taught in public schools there for many, many years. He was married to one of the Morgan daughters. That marriage did not last, but it's really interesting to see that he pops up within this collection. And then on the bottom of your screen is a certificate of allotment, and Gideon Morgan, who is within this collection, was a lawyer. And so he worked a lot with Cherokee citizenship and land allotments. And so there's a lot of really good information in here. Other topics that can be explored include slavery and the Civil War, education, because there were several teachers within this family that taught in public schools. And then they were very well known. So there's lots of society kinds of things that you can find in there. And then one of our more recent collections that we got was by author Maurice Kinney. He was a Mohawk descended poet, writer and editor. And if you were a Native writer within the 60s and the 70s, you knew Maurice Kinney and you were communicating with him. His correspondence collection within this collection is huge. I'm sure you've heard of Joy Harjo, our most recent poet laureate. When she was young, she was writing to Maurice Kinney, and just lots and lots of really interesting things within there. Maurice was from upstate New York, and he actually studied under the 4th poet laureate of the United States, Louise Bogan. In addition to being a prolific poet, he was also a publisher and created Contact 2 and Strawberry Press, which Both were influential in publishing new young Native authors and poets. He won an American Book Award, and he was twice nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. So he was a very seminal figure within Native American literature. And he passed away in 2016, I believe, so not that long ago. And so we were tickled when we got the phone call that said, do y'all want this? And we said, yes, how can we get it? It took a little time because it was during COVID, and the executor of his literary collection was actually in Canada at the time. So it was 6 to 9 months before we actually received that. But it has recently been processed and it's available for research. And then I couldn't not talk about Dr. Littlefield's collection. He is actually currently processing his own his own papers. He has written 35, 40 books within his career, and who even knows how many articles. I mean, this man is legendary. But his collection, even though it is not fully processed, is one of our most requested and frequently used collections. He is one of the leading authorities on Black Indians, and he wrote 4 books on the subject. He did not write the 5th one because he thought, oh, I think a Native person needs to write it, and no one has yet to do that. And I told him, you should have just written it yourself. He's also done extensive research on Indian removal and worked with the National Park Service. And then, like I said, he started out this collection looking at Native literature. And so he and Dr. Perrins created a 2-volume biobibliography of Native writers, which has, I don't know how you can even measure the impact it has had on the study of Native literature today. Because when I go out to conferences and stuff and meet people, they're like, you get to work with him? I said, yes, I do. I'm one of the lucky people. Yeah, it's definitely worth a trip. Switching gears again, we also have a huge collection of videos from Heartbeat Alaska, which was a show that was geared to capture Alaska Native daily life. It began in 1992 with Jeannie Green, who was an Inupiat journalist, and she gave us over 1,200 videos that she produced, known as Heartbeat Alaska, but she also produced other shows. This Generation was a youth-focused show that she did. Northern Lives was about a 3 to 5 minute segment that would appear on mainstream news there in Anchorage. And then We Win, which was a religious show that she did. We were able to acquire the copyright for this collection, and so all of these videos are now available on YouTube. One of the things that I was really excited, I mean, obviously I'm Alaska Native, so I was really excited about this collection, but once I got into it and started processing it, I found videos of my grandmother that I didn't know were in there, and even a cousin. So we were lucky to have 2 Alaska Native students work with us on this collection, who are both from Southeast Alaska, and they were able to find relatives as well. And one of the best things about this is that it's up on YouTube, so anybody can see it. And I mean, at least once a week, somebody's commenting on a video saying, oh, I love this. This is my grandmother, and I didn't know this existed, or, oh, I miss home, like they've moved away. And so it's just a really powerful capture of history of Alaska Native life. So we have two ongoing projects that we are working on right now. One is called Journey of Survival, and you can go to journeyofsurvival.org and see it online. We also have a touch screen in our space that I think is a cooler way to experience the project. But what we did is, like I said, we've done a lot of research and work with the National Park Service for the Trail of Tears. Infamously, they only wanted to focus on Cherokee removal when there were 4 other tribes that came through the state at the same time. And so we wanted to map those routes through the state of Arkansas. And so we have identified over 80 sites within the state that had some kind of significance for during removal. What we did is Dr. Littlefield and a graduate assistant that we had traveled. I think he said he put over 10,000 miles on his truck for this project. And they went and visited every site, took photographs, so that way if you wanted to go and visit these places, you would know what to look for. What's interesting is that whenever Arkansas was created, we were basically created because of Indian removal. We had to have banks in order to fund this, and so we couldn't have banks if we didn't have statehood. And anyway, it's all tied in there together. But a lot of the routes that were used during removal are now like main thoroughfares today. Because we were a poor state when we first began, we didn't have infrastructure to create new roads. And so the roads that were there were the ones that were used, and then they were just paved over, and that's what we still travel on today. But at each site we're trying to have primary resource documents that show like this is what happened at this place. So we have a lot of receipts that have rations where they would need feed for their livestock. They would need sugar and tea and medical supplies. And so we can track where they were and what they were doing at these places. And so it's a really cool resource, and we are still uploading things. Like this went live in 2020, but we're still 5 years later adding more things and creating more things for that. The second ongoing research project that we have is called our Modern Warriors of World War I. It kind of stemmed from a 2017 exhibit that we did about code talkers during the First World War. And then we realized, wait, like people didn't know that World War I used code talkers. They just assumed Navajos in World War II. But they also didn't realize that there were approximately 12,000 American Indians and Alaska Natives who served during the First World War. And at this time, only about a third of them had citizenship, which makes it even more remarkable because they were not required to go. We created a website to commemorate this event with the Centennial Commission for the war in 2019, and that the website still lives on. However, it is archived by the Library of Congress, and so we cannot make any more updates to it, which kind of hinders our research. So we're actually writing a grant this year to create our own standalone website. We have identified just over half of those men that served, and we're still looking for the other 6,000. But we just feel like it's an incredible story that's kind of been forgotten, and we want to bring more awareness to it. And then I'm going to end on a kind of contemporary current day and how this relates to us. So how many of you saw Killers of the Flower Moon? None? Oh my goodness. I mean, now granted, it's really long, but it's really good. So I would highly recommend you watch. They did a fantastic job capturing this like horrific chapter in Osage Nation history. Basically, the Osage people were being murdered so that white people could get their hands on these gas and mineral and oil rights. The investigation that went into these murders basically created what is the FBI today. So it was kind of a big deal. And they actually passed a law. Like, obviously, murdering people is against the law, right? But they created a law in the 1920s saying it was illegal to murder an Osage person. That's how bad it was. So they Martin Scorsese created this in close collaboration with the Osage Nation, because he wanted to be able to tell a correct and factual story. And he did a fantastic job, and the Osage Nation very much championed this film. So if you want to learn more, we obviously have the Osage Nation News in our collection, because they very much covered what was happening for the film. But then we also have a collection known as the Lewis F. Burns Papers, and he was a tribal historian and wrote several books about the Osage Nation and their history, including genealogy and talking about these Osage murders that were happening. So I would definitely recommend coming to see us if you want to learn more. Did anybody hear about Alaska Daily? Okay, it only lasted for one season, but they did a fantastic job of bringing awareness to the missing and murdered Indigenous women that is happening right now. This week, a 14-year-old girl's body was discovered from, I can't remember if it was California or Arizona, and it's just Arizona.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. It's just heartbreaking that this is happening. And so what Alaska Daily did was kind of bring that into the mainstream consciousness and followed one particular fictional event of a murdered, I think she was a Nupiaq girl. Within our collection, you can learn more about this topic, just looking at the Native newspapers that we have. And then we also have copies of special investigations and reports. And so it's a really heartbreaking period that's happening even today. So I would recommend you come to take a look at that. And then the last thing that I want to talk about, this is actually brand new, on Hulu, called Vow of Silence, the Assassination of Annie Mae. And this follows the story of the murder of Annie Mae Aquash, who was in the American Indian movement during the 1960s and 70s. And I mentioned earlier that Akwesasne Notes was one of those seminal newspapers who covered that time period. And this documentary actually talks about what led up to that murder, and it includes Leonard Peltier and Clyde Bellencourt and just all of those really important people during that time frame. And obviously you can read about it in the newspapers that we have, but we also just got the investigative research that Paul DeMaine put together over the past 30 years. He is an Oneida journalist who had his own newspaper, News from Indian Country. And at one point in time, he was receiving death threats for the investigations that he was doing. And I was watching Vow of Silence, and Paul DeMaine pops up on the screen, and I'm like, I had no idea. Like, we've got his materials, but he didn't tell us that he was actually part of this documentary. So we have a feeling that we will start receiving a lot of requests to see that material, because this has brought more light to that subject. So I could go on and on and on and on, but I will stop and let y'all ask any questions you have. I do have my phone number and my email up here, and I think I have a handful of cards if you want to reach me further. But I thought I'd turn it over to you and see if y'all have any questions for me. Yes.
So you were talking about the murders, about the different what's like the significance of why are they being murdered? Just repeat.
Well, the short answer is we don't know, but the long answer is that the areas where these women are going missing and being murdered, there is a lot of racial tension between the white people in the area and the indigenous people. And so kind of like, you know, those serial killers that focused on prostitutes, it's that same idea of they're expendable. So that's a longer answer. Yeah.
So if somebody wanted to come and consult the collections,
Yes.
do you need to make an appointment ahead of time, or do you just come? Do you have sort of one of the hours?
So we're open Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. We're open to the public, so like literally anybody can come in and look at stuff. I would suggest, because there are only 2 of us, that you do contact us ahead of time just to make sure like something didn't come up and we both have to be out of the office that day. It doesn't happen that often, but it does happen. So yeah, if you want to send us an email or a phone call, we'll be glad to talk to you and point you in the right direction, because, you know, we don't expect you to know. Just come with your questions and we'll hopefully try to find you an answer. Yeah. Yes.
Do y'all ever help people find like relatives documents? Like, I know a member, their descendant is from Cherokee tribe. There's no documentation. Like, do y'all help kind of, if it is out there, locate it? Is that something you provide?
So we don't do a lot of genealogy just because that's a whole different ball game. But if you do have specific questions about like where to look for resources, we will try to point you in the right direction. We do get questions from time to time about genealogical kinds of things. And if we can point you to a place to look, we're more than happy to do so. But genealogy usually takes a long time. And so we really can't spend a lot of staff time doing that. But yeah, if you have a specific question, we'd be glad to help you. Any other burning questions?
Just a minor question. I was curious. It was Dr. Littlefield.
Yes.
I saw the stack of books by his picture. I was just curious. The titles I could read, it looked like some of them anyway, I could tell were sort of highly academic titles.
Oh, yes.
Does he write more things for a popular audience or fiction?
No.
No.
It is all academic. Oh, I was gonna.
It was one or two.
Yeah.
There.
So yeah, so these are his Chickasaw Freedman book, Seminole Burning, which was that at one point in time, we had a phone call saying Kevin Costner was interested in making a movie about Seminole Burning. And I'm like, what? Can I answer the phone? I'm going to answer the phone from now on, right? We never got that phone call, but he's had several people. The Seminole Burning book very much mirrors the Elaine race massacre that happened and like the Tulsa race riots. And he said that was one of the hardest books he had to write. Just talking to family members, and he's had several people within the past 5 years or so reach out to him, and they are the white people that were descendants of the people that did the burning. Talk about a hard conversation to have. You know, they're looking at trying to figure out who their relatives were, and he's like, well, they weren't so good. But yeah, so yes, very much academic. Yeah. I will say though that he does have a PhD in modern poetry. And he as a joke, he's a character, y'all. As a joke, because there was like this friction in the English department between like the literature professors and the creative writers. And the creative writers like, we need more, we can't teach all the courses that you literature professors can teach. We need more away time. And so he's like, well, I'm gonna show them that you don't. And so he just started writing poetry and sending it in under a nom de plume. And he was like getting poetry published like every week, just proving that like, you don't need time off. You can do the same thing I can. I tell you, he's funny, y'all. So he's perfectly capable. He just chooses not to. Yeah. If there are no more questions, like I said, feel free to contact me if you're interested in coming to see what we've got. We'll gladly show you around. And then we might have a couple of events coming up this year that we'll try to keep y'all informed about. We're working on possibly a concert of Native American music that might be of interest. And we're also trying to get in a Native speaker sometime in the fall. So we'll definitely keep y'all informed. But thank you very much for having me out.
And we think there's a discussion next Wednesday,
Yes.
but we don't have a poster for it yet, so.
It'll
Yeah,
be-
just gonna get you.
Okay, I do have a card if you.
I'll take a card.
Okay.